My fated mate, Alpha Cain Fenwick, rejects me for another she-wolf. That same night, rogues ambush him. The rejection tears his wolf apart, and the brutal fight shatters his memory. He remembers nothing. Who are you? I'm your mate, your future Luna. I corner him by sacred spring, and close my hand around his wrist. Can't you feel the bond between us? I've made my peace with his rejection, but the bond between fated mates still has its hooks in him. The ice in his eyes starts to thaw, and I watch him walk straight into my lie. Good. Let Cain fall for me all over again, so hard he can't break free. Then I'll show him exactly what it's like to be cast aside by the one he loves most. Alpha Cain Fenwick, my fated mate, had rejected me for another she-wolf. Now that he'd lost his memory, I meant to make him fall for me again, and be the one to reject him. I led him back to the Alpha's bed, a wide, almost bare expanse. Cain settled against the headboard. His amber eyes were still clouded with confusion, and he looked like a wild creature dropped into a world that made no sense. He studied me, his eyes holding a faint trace of curiosity and need. His voice came out hoarse. Tell me about our past. I sat on the edge of his bed, met his searching gaze, and began to spin my first lie. Our first meeting was by sacred spring. I looked at him, letting just enough warmth into my voice. There was a full moon that night. You'd gone there to pray, and I was only a beta who had slipped out to watch the moon. You found me, but you didn't drive me away. You said you'd never seen a wolf like me, that my eyes looked as if they held a whole galaxy. Cain's brows tightened at my words, as if he were pulling something half-formed from a haze of memory. Suddenly his body jerked. His amber eyes flew wide. He looked at me as wariness and confusion gave way to recognition. I remembered something. He reached for me as if he were going under, grasping the one thing that might keep him afloat. I went with it, set my hand in his, and felt his warmth rise to meet mine. I pressed my advantage and drew a moonstone from my frayed pocket. Of course you'd remember. You gave me this. I set the smooth moon-washed stone in Cain's palm. You called it your token. As long as I carry it, your wolf will find me, no matter where you are. The moment he touched it, a familiar heat surged through him like a live current. He closed his fist around it. His gaze held mine, lit with the wild relief of something finally found and a devotion that ran to the bone. It's mine. It belongs to me, Cain murmured, as if trying to convince himself. He didn't know that he'd seen this moonstone before he lost his memory, and before he rejected me. Back then, Selena Crowther, his sickly, frail childhood sweetheart, had just returned to the country. Cradled against his chest, she coughed up a thin thread of blood, her face drained of color. She gripped his wrist, her voice shaking. Beta Islas. Power is overwhelming, Cain. My wolf felt like it was being torn apart just being near her. I'm scared. When Cain saw Selena, the one he'd looked out for since they were kids, hurting, a chill cut through his eyes. He nodded and said firmly, "Leave it to me." Cain came straight to Beta's cabin, a rundown little place I called home. Seething with a cold, hard fury, he kicked my door open. Cain! I flinched at the crash. I was by the window in the moonlight, cradling a whining pup with an injured leg. Cain didn't spare it a glance. For the first time, his amber eyes held no admiration or approval. They were hard and hostile, raking over me as if to judge. He closed in step by step, the alpha energy bearing down on me. He fixed his gaze on me and asked, his voice as cold as ice. What exactly is that power coming off you? The question threw me off balance. Selena said. Cain faltered, conflict flickering in his eyes before responsibility snapped back into place. She said your power would hurt her. I met his eyes and caught the doubt seeded by a she-wolf's lie. The warmth in me faded. I gave him no answer. With the moonstone resting against my chest, I lowered my head and kept humming that old, soothing tune to calm the trembling pup in my arms. Cain bristled when I ignored him. He was about to snap until the moonstone in my hand kindled a soft glow. He watched the pup's whimpers ebb and finally fade into sleep. He'd never witnessed anything so tender. The moment felt pure, almost hallowed, standing in stark relief to the dark caricature Selena had painted of me. Cain went still. The blaze in his eyes guttered to embers, the heat giving way to a conflict he couldn't swallow. The sight rattled him, but in the end, the memory of how pale and fragile Selena looked overruled his better judgment. The elders used to whisper behind closed doors about where I came from. I was born into the white wolf bloodline, the kind our pack saw maybe once a century. My power answered to moonlight and the raw pull of the wild. I carried gifts of healing and calm that outstripped any ordinary werewolves. To anyone who didn't understand, my lineage looked mysterious, maybe even dangerous. Cain was clearly one of them. He stepped closer and pointed at the moonstone in my hand. His gaze went hard, his voice stripped of warmth as he asked, "This stone boosts your power, doesn't it? You've been using it to stir the white wolf in your blood, huh?" I pressed the stone to my chest and kept quiet. Cain took my silence as a yes. He regarded me as if I were cradling something dangerous, a weapon to be confiscated. He spoke slowly, each word tearing my heart a little wider. "Selena's wolf is weak. It needs constant soothing. That thing is too dangerous in your hands. Give it to me." I stared at him in disbelief. "No, give it to me," Cain repeated, his tone brooking no argument. He pried my fingers apart and snatched the moonstone from my palm as if my protest meant nothing. The moment it left my hand, what little warmth remained in me flickered and died. Before Cain walked away, he gave me one last ice-cold remark. "I'd give it to Selena. It would do more for her than it would for you." He turned, took my moonstone, and vanished into the dark. I could already see him placing the stone in Selena's palm, and telling her the threat was gone. She would look up at him with those innocent eyes and whisper, in a small, fragile voice, "You're so kind, Cain." I smiled at that. So as it turned out, the so-called fated mate was nothing special after all. The swell of memory broke, and I was back in the room. I looked at Cain, who'd apparently forgotten his own sins. I choked back the hate and managed a sad, unyielding smile. I eased my hand out of his, caught his other hand, the one clutching the moonstone, and pressed it gently to my cheek. I met his eyes, wearing a devotion that could pass for the real thing. "Do you remember now?" Cain searched my eyes and finally nodded. "I remember." I was glad to hear it. The gilded cage I'd built had been waiting for him all along. I held Cain's eyes and let the warmth speak for me. "We've got a trove of good memories. You just can't remember them right now." His amber eyes stayed on me, like a pup watching my lips for the next tale. "Remember that night the storm blew in? You came home cut up after climbing the cliff to pluck the lone moonlight flower for me. You said its glow was mine and mine alone." Sadly, Selena's tears cost me the moonlight flower. Cain placed the flower that should have been mine by her pillow, right before my eyes. All I could do was smile and say, "I understand." My words eased the confusion in Cain's eyes, bringing a faint warmth to them. He subconsciously reached out and touched the old scar on his shoulder. I seized the moment and continued. "Remember when that giant bear lost its way and blundered into the forest? It came at me, and everyone else bolted. You were the only one who sprinted over and put yourself between us. I remember your roar, and the way blood speckled your face when the bear went down. You didn't even blink. You turned back to me and said that as long as you were around, nothing would hurt me." However, Cain stayed with Selena for a month to calm her down. He told me to stay away so I wouldn't bring any more trouble her way. He thought he was protecting me. In truth, it was confinement and humiliation by another name. Cain's breath quickened. The alpha instinct to shield and possess me flared back to life in his amber eyes. "This dagger," I said, resting my hand over his, the one now wrapping around an obsidian dagger. His hand stiffened, but he didn't pull away. "Once, when it was just us at Sacred Spring, you taught me to wield it. Your hand guided mine." My fingertips traced the ridges of his knuckles, raised by the strength of his grip. "Your palm was warm against the back of my hand. You said you were my alpha, and I was your future Luna. Half the dagger's power was mine. It'd keep me safe forever, just as you'd always love me." The last trace of wariness and confusion in Cain's eyes vanished. In its place rose devotion and compassion, lost and found again. He turned his hand over and took mine. In a hoarse voice he said, "Isla, I'm sorry. I forgot you." He believed it. He believed all of it. My gaze flicked to the obsidian dagger. Cain had unsheathed it in front of me, not to teach me how to wield it, but because Selena had accidentally mentioned she'd seen me training alone in the woods, and was afraid for my safety. He found me and drove the dagger into the dirt at my feet. Exasperated, he said, "Isla, you're my Luna. Stop doing what you're not supposed to. Keeping you safe is my job. All you have to do is stay behind me. Understand?" Cain thought it was love. He had no idea he'd erased who I was in the name of love. Fine. Let him sink into the sweetness I spun out of his own sins. The deeper he fell for me, the rosier those memories would seem, and when the truth finally hit, it would hurt all the more. "Beta Isla, can I come in?" Selena, who always looked delicate and breakable, stood in Cain's doorway with a mug. I swallowed the urge to scoff and put on a pleasant smile. "Sure, Selena." She moved to the bedside and placed the mug down. Her voice was so faint it sounded like she might collapse at any moment. "I brewed a calming potion for you, Cain. I heard you've lost your memory and your wolf has been unstable. Take a sip. It'll ease things." Cain just looked at me and said nothing. Selena seemed oblivious to the tension in the room. She turned to me and spoke with a sincerity that made it sound as if she had only his best interests at heart. "I know you and Cain are mates, Beta Isla, but his wolf is still so fragile after what he went through. The healer said those of the white wolf bloodline have an empathic sense. They can actually feel their mate's pain." She trailed off, worry and reluctance gathering behind her eyes. "I'm worried that if you stay with him, you'll end up feeling his pain too. It's the kind that feels like your wolf being torn in two. You couldn't possibly bear it. So for your own sake, could you step back for a bit?" What a move, playing the for your own good card. I said nothing. I went to the bedside, lifted the mug of potion, brought it to my nose, and drew a breath. A faint, peppery sting rose into my sinuses. I let a small frown slip right in front of Cain. Then I turned to Selena, eyes wide and guileless. "Selena, did you put nemowort rootstock in this potion?" She froze, as if she hadn't expected me to notice. Still, even with her ploy laid bare, not a flicker of panic crossed her face. If anything, she squared her shoulders, righteous as ever. Selena met my eyes, her voice threaded with challenge and pride. "So what if I did? The healer said nemowort can rouse an injured wolf, and help Cain recall the past. Don't you want Cain to get his memory back, Beta Isla?" She obviously wanted Cain's memory back. She couldn't wait for him to recall how he'd hurt me to keep her safe, how icy he'd been to me, and how deeply he'd loathed me. She believed that once his memory returned, he'd be hers again. As Selena's words died out, I blanched on purpose and let the mug tremble in my hand. I let her taunt slide and turned to Cain on the bed, pain and disbelief burning in my eyes. "Get his memory back?" I gave a brittle smile. My voice hitched, like I was already about to cry, like her thoughtless cruelty had just broken something in me. "Don't you know, Selena?" I faced her, my voice raw with betrayal. "Nemowort is a cure for ordinary wolves. But for Cain, whose wolf is grievously wounded, any herb that forces his memories back is deadly poison." My voice spiked, hoarse with fear. "That'll cage his broken wolf in those splintered memories, ripping at him over and over. Whenever he thinks back, it'll feel like his wolf is being torn open all over again." "Is that what you want, letting pain grind him down until he's a wreck who does nothing but roar?" Color drained from Selena's face. Shaken by what I'd laid out, she stumbled back. "No, I didn't know, I just wanted to help him." "Enough." Cain's voice came cold and final, cutting the scene short. His eyes flicked to Selena, shaken and wide-eyed, after nearly setting off a disaster by going off on her own. Then, his gaze settled on the tears streaking my face born of fear and heartache. Cain rose from the bed, came to me, and pulled me into the shelter of his arms. He took the mug of potion from my hand, and smashed it against the floor without even glancing at it. The mug shattered. The sound cut through the room like a slap to Selena's face. Cain looked at her. Disgust and disappointment lay bare in his eyes. "Isla is my mate, Selena. Her scent is the only thing that settles my wolf. As for you," he paused, his voice iron, leaving no room for argument. "Drop the do-gooder act and get out. From now on, you don't set foot in here unless I say so." The finality and the coldness in his gaze, something he'd never turned on Selena before, shattered her heart. She couldn't fathom how doing it for his sake had brought her to this. She ran out in tears. I sank into Kane's arms, a smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth where no one would see. Of course, I knew what Nemowort could do. It would be excruciating, but there was a good chance it would bring back his memory. I couldn't let that happen, not yet. Not until my game was over. My devotion moved Kane. Whatever doubts he'd had about me were long gone. In their place, his tenderness redoubled, and he vowed to make it all up to me. He decided to hold a coronation. In the days leading up to it, the whole pack buzzed with feverish celebration. It was the perfect cover for my final preparations. While the pack busied themselves weaving flower garlands and prepping the feast, I hid behind the excuse of looking for calming herbs for Kane. I made frequent trips to the old healer's cabin at the edge of our territory. No one suspected a thing. To them, I was just the dutiful, soon-to-be Luna taking care of Kane. On the night of the full moon, the bonfire at the pack's sacred altar flared to life again. Kane took my hand and held on tight in front of the whole pack. His amber eyes were fixed on me alone. The raw, unguarded love in them could have undone any she-wolf. He raised his voice. Here tonight, I officially mark my mate. Isla Stromholt will be my one and only Luna for the rest of my life. I, Kane Fenwick, swear it. Cheers erupted and thundered across the night sky. I met his gaze and saw a fire lit for me, fierce enough to burn the world down. I had won. Vengeance rushed through me like the richest wine, settling deep in my bones. Just before the ceremony began, I murmured, Kane, before I become your Luna, I want a moment alone to pray to the moon goddess. Is that okay? His voice was warm with fondness. Of course, my Luna. I'll wait right here. I turned and returned to my room. I wrote my goodbye note calmly. It held a single cold line. Kane, you've paid for your choices. The game is over. I left a thick stack of evidence beneath it that documented every time Selena had set me up. Then I stepped into the endless dark and didn't look back. Not long after I left, the door flew open. The room was empty, except for the note lying quietly beside the pillow. Kane picked it up with shaking hands. The last words escaped him. The game is over. A crushing sense of betrayal and confusion cinched around Kane's throat like an invisible hand. When his gaze finally landed on the last page of the evidence, a bolt of pain ripped through him from deep in his wolf. Long-buried memories all surged at once. Kane remembered Selena, over and over, bearing the raw patches my herbs had burned into her skin. Through tears, she murmured, Beta Isla didn't mean it, she's only trying to help you. I'm the weak 1 inch. He remembered her begging him not to hurt me because of her. All the while wearing that wide-eyed innocence, as if she'd die if he didn't take her side. He remembered how completely he'd swallowed Selena's act, polished, practiced, and built on lies. He remembered what he'd done to shield his fragile childhood sweetheart, and to settle what he liked to call a debt of gratitude. That day, I waited for Kane at Sacred Spring, my heart fit to burst, only to hear the words that split my wolf in two. I reject you. At last, everything fell into place for Kane. A roar tore out of him, big enough to shake the world. The Blackstone pack shuddered at the sound. When that roar of despair finally burned itself out, a hush fell. A heartbeat later, a silver-gray blur burst from the Alpha's compound and tore toward the council hall. Driven by pure fury, the hall's main door, hewn from a century-old giant's trunk and built to intimidate, splintered beneath Kane's kick. He shifted back to human and stepped inside. His face was pale with weakness, but a cold killing intent burned in his amber eyes. Inside the council hall, Selena, who'd been gloating about my escape, and the elders lurched to their feet in shock. Once the shock wore off, she reset her features into what she must have thought was a clever mask of sorrow. She stepped toward Kane, poised to steady him, her voice thick with feigned concern. What happened to you, Kane? Did Beta Isla curse you before she fled? I knew she couldn't be trusted. Say the word. I'll take a team and bring her back to face the harshest judgment. Selena thought her moment had come again. Kane's smile was winter cold. He fixed his gaze on her, his voice unnervingly calm. Back then, you smeared Isla as a witch and forged evidence, claiming her herbs were poison. The color drained from Selena's face as she stumbled back in a panic. And no, that's not true, let me explain, Cain. I did it for you. To protect you. A flash of pure scorn cut through Cain's eyes. Protect me? No, you did it for yourself. For the Luna's seat that you're never getting. He closed the distance and looked down at her as if she were an ant. He lifted his hand and set it lightly on the crown of her head. He watched her, his voice unnervingly calm. I want back every bit of alpha essence I poured into you. The power that kept you barely hanging on, and let you spin your lies. No. Selena let out a blood-curdling scream. Streams of pale gold energy tore free from her body and surged back into Cain's palm. Her body visibly withered, her strength bleeding away by the second. The long, glossy hair she'd always prized turned brittle as straw in a heartbeat. By the time Cain drew his hand away, she was a flower wrung dry. She crumpled on the floor, her breathing thin and fading. He took everything, not just his power, but the very health she'd relied on to survive. He stripped her back to what she'd been at birth, frail and unlikely to make it through the next winter. Cain bent to Selena's ear and whispered a final curse, his voice cruel. Watch with your own eyes as I win my true Luna back, step by step. His fury rolled through the Blackstone pack like thunder. He personally questioned anyone with even the faintest lead. At last, he crossed the threshold of the old healer's stone cottage. Where is she? Cain asked, cutting to the chase, his eyes bloodshot. The old healer didn't answer. He pressed a parchment map into Cain's hand. You can't give her what she wants, Alpha Cain. She's gone to a place with no ranks and no alphas, a place where she can be herself. Cain studied the unfamiliar place marked on the map and fell silent. He didn't waver. He turned everything over for now to the beta who'd taken my place, the one he trusted most. Then the alpha, who had never set foot in the human world, sheathed his fangs and claws and pulled on human clothes. He set out alone, into danger and the unknown, just another outsider. I was at an A-list fashion gala in Lumenbury. Champagne in hand, I worked the room with practiced ease. I wove through perfume, silk and polished updos, my smile flawless and professional. But I knew he was here. I could feel it. From the dimmest, most forgettable corner of the hall, a stare found me, searing, obsessive, freighted with pain and regret. It cast an invisible net over me and pulled it taut. Cain. He'd come for me after all. A cold laugh curled in my chest, but I didn't turn. I took in the human world's power players crowding around me, admiring my talent and praising my designs. Their eyes lit with pure adoration, drawing on my white wolf bloodline's preternatural attunement to the elements. I'd become the jewelry designer they raved about as a breathtaking talent. In a matter of months, my brand Moonlight had become the hottest newcomer in the fashion world. I wasn't the witch they used to shun. I was my own queen. After the gala, I sent everyone home. The runway stood empty. I was the last one there. And there he was, Cain, still skulking in the shadows. How long are you going to hide? I asked, my voice cold, the words echoing through the cavernous hall. He flinched in the dark, then stepped out slowly, like a banished, battered beast. Isla, he rasped. In those amber eyes that used to look down on everyone, there was nothing left but pleading humility. I raised a finger and cut him off. Shoo. I didn't look back at Cain. Instead, I turned and walked up the runway they'd built for me. On either side, cases held the pieces I'd designed myself. Under the lights, they caught the glow and threw it back, bright as starlight. I looked them over. They're beautiful, aren't they? I asked, a thin thread of pride in my voice. At last, Cain couldn't help himself. He stepped forward, reaching for my hand. Come back with me, Isla. I slipped easily out of reach. Go back. I laughed without a trace of warmth. Back where? Back to that world where I had to stay on guard every second, wondering what illness your childhood sweetheart would fake next just to set me up. I turned and sauntered toward the lone throne at the end of the runway, the seat reserved for the chief designer. I sat like a queen and looked down at him. I met Cain's eyes and said, each word clear and deliberate, I'm my own alpha here. I built everything I have with my own two hands, not out of anyone's pity or charity. I don't need a mate, and I sure don't need. My voice went cold, every word honed to cut deep. A foolish alpha who would lay hands on his fated mate for the sake of a weakling who does nothing but cry. The words landed clean and hard. Kane's tall frame jolted under the weight of them. Isla, I know I was wrong. You weren't. I cut him off, my stare cold as ice. You made your choice out of gratitude and duty. Now I've made mine. I rose and walked toward him, unhurried, like I was making the rounds on my own turf. The game's over, Kane. I'm the only one who won. Now, do me a favor. Get out of my life. I brushed past him without a second thought. I figured Kane would cut and run, like an alpha who'd been soundly beaten, tail tucked as he slipped back to his own world. But he didn't. By morning, the penthouse across from my studio had a new owner. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, holding a cup of coffee and coolly watching the lone figure in the windows across from mine. Kane didn't budge. From first light to nightfall, he stayed there like a statue. Was that supposed to count as penance? How absurd. Moonlight had grown big enough to paint a target on our backs, and the heat hit fast. A deep-pocketed luxury conglomerate lifted my newest collection and flexed its distribution muscle to launch first, trying to ice out the newcomer, us, before we could even get to market. We were stretched thin and scrambling. Our cease and desist letters barely made a ripple. For the first time in the big money world, I felt that old familiar powerlessness kick in. But by morning, that high-flying luxury conglomerate had filed for bankruptcy. Its stock was suddenly worthless, and the founder had been taken into custody overnight by federal authorities on charges including malicious short-selling and financial fraud. I stood at the window and looked across. Kane was still there, a shade paler than usual. Exhaustion was plain in those amber eyes. He left his hand on the sill. I could see unhealed scars across the back of his hand, as if a blade had scored them. I knew he'd done it. He'd tapped the werewolf world's hidden, ancient power, enough to rattle the human financial system. And every time he used it, that power exacted a price. Kane stayed close, quiet and always there. My business rivals would go bankrupt overnight, and the lights in his apartment would burn until morning. The street punks who harassed me would vanish without a trace by the next day, and I'd spot a few fresh drops of blood in the trash can downstairs. Even the paid trolls who had gone after me online were taken down before dawn. From the window across from mine, I'd catch Kane's exhausted silhouette, fingers working the keys all night. He had done it all, yet he still couldn't bring himself to face me. That night, I'd been out entertaining a client until late, cutting through a quiet alley on my way home. A few hostile figures slipped out of the dark and closed in. They didn't read as werewolves, but the air around them carried a cold intent to kill, and the metal in their hands flashed silver. My chest tightened. I braced to strike. Out of nowhere, a blur lunged before I could blink. I didn't even catch what happened. All I heard were a few dull, bone-snapping cracks and a handful of short, ragged screams. When I came to, most of the mercenaries were already down. One was still alive, pinned under Kane's boot. A silver dagger jutted from Kane's chest. He'd stepped between me and the blade, taking the hit. Blood pooled at his feet. He looked at me. There was no flicker of pain in those amber eyes, only a tenderness bright with relief that stole my breath. Then slowly he crumpled in front of me. In the hospital's VIP suite, I looked at Kane lying in bed, his face white as paper. The wall in my chest finally crumbled. I lost to that love of his, reckless, all-in, stupid to the very end. I stepped closer, sat by his bed, and took his hand, which was cold from blood loss. My voice shook as I said, "I still love you, Kane." In an instant, the light in his eyes flared, bright enough to set the whole universe aglow. A week later, thanks to his exceptional healing ability, Kane had all but recovered from his injuries. That morning, as usual, he watched me from the window across the street. For the first time, I pulled the curtains back and beckoned him over. He froze. Joy flashed in his eyes, and he nearly tumbled down the stairs in a headlong rush. Moonlight Studio welcomed a new uninvited guest. Kane stood in my office doorway, shoulders hunched and at a loss. He met my eyes, his voice tentative, trying to placate me while angling for credit. "I've taken care of Selena." I raised a brow. "Oh." He watched my face. I sent the surviving mercenary back to the pack. I had him testify against Selena in front of everyone. For colluding with outsiders and plotting against the Luna. She's been exiled for good to frozen barrens up north. She'll live, but she'll never see the sun or feel even a hint of warmth. Kane's gaze never left me, his body wound tight. I leaned back in the executive chair, my voice giving nothing away. Are you finished? Finished. I nodded. Good. Now, Mr. Fenwick, let's talk about your problem. My problem. I picked up the file on my desk and tossed it to him. Yes, your job application. You'll be my assistant. Probation is 3 months. No housing, no meals, and no benefits. Now grab me a coffee. No sugar. Thanks. Kane looked down at the indenture, then back at me. For the first time, something like hurt flickered in his amber eyes. He took it and gave a firm nod. Yes, Miss Stromholt. Kane headed to the break room and poured black tea, thinking it was coffee. When he tried the printer, he somehow managed to disassemble the whole thing. During my meetings, he'd station himself at the door, stone-faced. One cold look, and any guy who tried to brief me turned back. When I'd finally had enough, I called him into my office. Kane, is there anything you can do right? He stepped in and eased me into his arms. Yeah. He murmured into my ear. I can love you. I leaned into Kane's chest. Feeling the steady thud of his heart, I finally laughed. Maybe I hadn't completely forgiven him yet, but it felt like the moon goddess had given us a second chance. This time, there was no Alpha, no Luna. There was only a clumsy suitor, and the one he'd do anything for.